Hi, I'm Kathleen. I'm the living arrangements designer with the original designs team here at Rogers Gardens. Today I'm going to demonstrate how to build this unique one-of-a-kind piece for your home. It is orchids on a grapevine driftwood. Some of the basic elements to this project are your orchids, some accessory plants, and the driftwood. This is some unique individual pieces that have been tumbling at sea and preserved by sea salt. And what we're going to look for in each individual piece that we select is something that has a nice open cavity that we can accommodate our plants, like our orchids and our accessory ferns. What we're using in this as your showpiece is the orchid. An orchid is an epiphyte. It is a plant that grows attached to other plants, typically trees. It tends to grow high up in the canopy of the trees, where it pulls its nutrients from the air, from debris from the trees and other plants around it, and it absorbs moisture from rain and humidity. One of the unique attributes of our orchids are these aerial roots. These are like little sponges that can soak up a lot of nutrients and store water. So often these plants are grown where they have a rainy season and a dry season, so they've adapted well to holding moisture when they need to hold it, and then they can absorb moisture when they have a chance to absorb it. I brought in a selection of ferns to show you. These are great accessory plants that tie well with the orchids. We have an autumn fern, we have a fluffy ruffles fern, we have a mother fern. These are often ferns that you'll see used in floral industry. They're a smaller statured fern, they're slower growing, so they work well in a smaller center piece like this. Also, I have a pair of pruners, I have some twine, I have some floral wire, and I have a mister. In this bucket I have some sheet moss. This sheet moss is not a live sheet moss. It's not living, it's just dried sheet moss that's been green enhanced. I've already wet this sheet moss down in preparation for working with this project. So let's get building. With my orchid, what I'm going to do is I'm going to handle it very carefully. I want to do minimal disruption to the root system that you're going to see as I take it out of the container. So I'm going to gently pull it away from the plastic container. I want to make sure I have room to fit 2 orchids in this small opening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull away. These roots are growing around some wet sphagnum peat moss. I'm going to just gently loosen some of these aerial roots that you're seeing in here. Pull away some of this interior Spanish or sphagnum moss because I need to be able to make this root ball a little smaller. So I'm pulling away some of this extra moss. As I do this, I want to look for any bad roots, anything that's maybe a little brown and discolored and looks like they're maybe dying or fading, and I'll prune those away just to clean up the root ball. Now I want to create an environment that's going to hold some moisture for our orchids when we do mist them, and that's what this sheet moss is good for. So I'm going to take the sheet moss and I'm going to wrap sections of my root ball. I'm taking care to leave these aerial roots out and exposed. These can eventually latch on and hold on to this piece of driftwood to help it secure. That's what it would do in the wild, up in the tree. It would hold on with these big aerial roots. So to attach my moss to my root ball, I'm going to use some twine. I'm just going to wrap it snug enough to kind of hold the root ball together. And now I'm going to insert my orchid into my opening. And keeping in mind, I have 2 orchids that I'm working with, so I need to kind of squish them in. So I'm going to kind of force them in a little bit, force them in, but still use a little bit of care to make sure that you're not busting up the roots any more than you have to. When you put it in your grapevine, you're going to want to think about the side of the grapevine that's going to be the most aesthetically pleasing. So I am going to think about my leaves, how they're positioned, both of the plants. I want to have a nice face to the leaves. And I also want the orchid to be in a aesthetically pleasing position. So it should kind of lean towards you and it can face out. So what I would like to see is one orchid gently leaning forward to one direction and the other one gently leaning forward in the other direction. This is just a nice display. So I'm going to finish securing this orchid in here, literally stuffing it down into this cavity. And there's the starting point. I'm going to work on the second one, pulling away this extra moss once again. As my space is getting smaller and smaller to work with, I'm going to go ahead and remove a few extra roots. Even though they're relatively healthy, It's okay to take a few extra roots off of your epiphytes. There's still plenty here to absorb nutrients and moisture. This is just going to help me get it into this small cavity. This orchid has the ability to generate plenty of new roots. While I'm positioning my orchids, I want to continue to pay attention to the presentation. As I've positioned my orchids, they both have a nice outward facing appearance. And to help hold the form, what I'm going to do is just take extra moss. I'm going to be forcing the extra moss in these empty cavities through the grapevine. And what this is going to do is help hold the orchids in, but also help hold them in a position that I'm pleased with. I want straight stems, arching flower tops, and by putting some extra moss in here, this is how I'm going to hold them in position that I like. On this back side, you can see I have my aerial roots are still out and exposed. This is ideal situation where the roots that were wrapped in the containers that they came in, those are the only roots that are down inside the cavity. Now I want to introduce some ferns. I'm going to use the mother fern. I really like the combination of this bright chartreusey green with the darker orchid leaves, and it really ties well with the lighter green that comes out as our orchids are opening. Another thing to keep in mind is this orchid's going to give you a long time of enjoyment. As you can see, we have many buds that are still here to open. If you selected an orchid where all of the buds are already open, you won't get to enjoy the blooms for as long. So pay attention to some closed buds, at least 2 or 3 closed buds. I have actually 4 or 5 closed buds, so I'm going to enjoy this orchid arrangement for quite a long time. So as I use my accessory mother fern, I don't have a lot of space to put a lot more plants. It's pretty full as it is. Ferns are very forgiving. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this fern apart, and I'm going to use 3 separate pieces to tuck into this arrangement. Just gently finding some roots, pulling on them, and separating individual little pieces. One of the reasons I pair ferns with orchids is because both of these do tend to grow in the canopy of a woodland forest, so it's a natural pairing for these 2 plants. So just like I did with my orchid, I'm going to put a little moss around my soil on my mother fern, and I'm going to attach it with a little bit of twine. Even though ferns are not all epiphytic, they still don't need a lot of root ball. They just need some moisture to keep growing, and they can send new roots right through my dampened moss. So I'm going to take my ferns, find a little opening, and work them into this display. Around my fern, I'm going to continue to push more wet sheet moss in and around. This is just going to hold this fern in. It's also going to help lock moisture in around that root ball. So I've positioned my orchids, I've added my accessory ferns, and one last piece here is when our orchids come from our growers, they're on a metal stake to hold them upright. This particular grower used some plastic clips. We don't want to leave these plastic clips on the finished product, so I'm going to add a small piece of wire to the stem to hold my orchid to this little metal rod, just simply lightly twisting and securing them. To take care of your new display, two ways you can treat this. You can have a spray bottle like you see here, and simply what you're going to do is once a week you're going to mist the aerial roots, you can mist the leaves, and you're going to want to mist near the base of all the ferns, and you're going to want to saturate that moss. This moss is going to create a little bit of humidity and hold some moisture in so that your orchids and ferns can take that moisture up. Another way is to just simply take this orchid to the sink and run water over it and let the entire display become saturated, and just let it drip dry. As far as placement, orchids do best with bright light but nothing direct. Put it within a few feet of a bright window, up to within 5 feet, 8 feet at the most. Bright light but not direct sunlight. Imagine sun coming through glass is going to magnify that sun and be much more direct than if it was just the regular sun rays hitting your orchid arrangement. So keep it out of direct sun, put it where it will be a showstopper in your home, where it will get plenty of attention, as this is a very unique, one-of-a-kind piece. Rogers Gardens brings beauty into your home and garden.